And here we are for another episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. I am excited. I am having a great day. Just because it started off about a half hour ago, I'm happy to say that I just slept in my bed for the first time in like 3 nights, and it was glorious. I certainly do appreciate all of the things that humans can come up with. Um, it's interesting. We have this incredible ability to create things. We just take it too far. It's like we forget that there can be a balance between everything is nature doing its thing and a little bit of order, or everything's got to be concrete suddenly. And that's really it. It's just concrete, flat surfaces. They're very comforting. And so we tend to think, well, more of that is better instead of some equilibrium with that. I'm going to take off this hat here in a second, but I wanted to point out I have a hat. I have a new hat. I'm happy about this hat. I've been telling people that I was going to buy this hat ever since the first retreat. In fact, I was telling my daughter and Melissa that I was going to buy this hat before that. The reason I like this hat is because it's fucking hilarious, for one. Two, I am a legitimate father, so daddy is actually quite appropriate. And I guess lastly, because it destroys a lot of impressions about me. I tend to talk about things in a way where people go, "Oh, well, you're like, this monk. You're this guy who always talks about cerebral things and enlightened concepts and so on and so forth." No, I have a terrible sense of humor. I say the weirdest shit. I walk around, and if you don't believe me, come to a retreat. You can see me in person. I have a legitimately bad sense of humor. I love it when people get upset. I love it when people just take the slightest inconvenience and go, and get all pissed off about it. And so this hat, which just says daddy, is super satisfying to me. And the reason it's satisfying to me is because nobody sees it coming. Everybody who knows me, they're just, well, actually, people who know me well enough, they see it coming. But everybody else, they just assume I would never wear something like this. I have another hat. I have another shirt, actually, that shows some children planting a garden. And in that garden is cannabis and peyote and mushrooms. And it says, "Let's plant a magical garden." See, things like that, I love that stuff because people get upset about stupid shit like that. And why? Why? I mean, it's a hat. It doesn't have a giant penis on it. I'm not deliberately being offensive. I'm a legitimate dad if you really want to look at it that way. The point is though, if it's not causing you to laugh, then maybe you're taking it too seriously. And I'd like to say the same thing about me. If you're not laughing at me, you're taking me too fucking seriously. Because I'm not trying to be serious. I don't want you to pray at the altar of unity. I don't want you to sit there going, "I need to figure out my shit." I don't want you to do that. I want you to laugh at yourself for even thinking you need to do that. Because you don't. You're already enough. You're chasing something you don't need to catch. You're chasing something you don't need to catch. And that is the problem with all this picture perfect Zen Buddhist enlightenment crap, is the fact that everybody's trying to get to this point where they're basically just fucking numb. Who wants to be numb? Personally, I think, if Jesus was walking around with a daddy hat, maybe there would have been less misunderstanding.
Oh my goodness. I'm thoroughly enjoying that hat and the sharing of it and the busting down, because I can tell you firsthand, I certainly had an idea. And for anyone who isn't aware, Ray and I didn't meet in person until we were 8 months into the podcast. So that might have been like season 3, like seasons 1 and 2 might have been before I even met him. And I straight up thought he was Eckhart Tolle for like the first 8 months. It was gnarly. And then meeting him in person, I won't go into too many details. You got to come to a retreat to see Ray live, but there is a stark difference in even just, I remember seeing him for the first time and you just like kind of perking your head over. And I think it was still during COVID. It's like you had a mask on, and then just like the lightness that you had the whole time. And it just wasn't, it was a lack of concern for like anything, and the degree to which you have a lack of concern about things, even as stuff comes up, like that's just it. And almost there's almost the striving for some fucking monk-like enlightenment is holding us off from being able to dance on the shit that does come up, because we think, we have a relative judgment about where I should be versus where I'm at right now, and that's the wall right there. So any idea you have of being something other than what you are ever, or that you should act differently than you are, like, is the wall right there. And who's to say that you can't just be you? You can't just be yourself in every moment. Like, the hesitation isn't necessary. The mulling over what could happen, what might happen, what should happen, what you hope happens, what you hope doesn't happen, all that stuff is kind of irrelevant to it playing out. There's no degree of focus on yourself that you can do that will make you better capable of handling any moment, any time, at any point. There's no degree of focus on yourself that helps as you're going through life. Also, because you're either paying attention to some fictitious idea or you're paying attention to what's happening. And as you're paying attention to what's happening, you start to notice so much more. And that in and of itself is the reward to paying attention. You're actually seeing things, like you're actually seeing reality. And that's it. It's not then you go sit on a fucking pillow with robes on and hum all day. It's like, why the fuck would you want to do that if you're seeing what's going on without so much concern, because things are playing out, and there's no benefit to not focusing on what's happening as you're going. Like, you see that, it's like, okay, everything's on the table. If you want to go chill and sit and close your eyes for a little bit and just like feel everything, that can be a really cool experience, but it certainly isn't remotely close to the answer. And thinking that it is just cuts us off, because like any answer we think we're getting to is reinforcing my weight. Like, it's reinforcing myself getting to an answer. In order to be getting anywhere, there has to be a me that's getting somewhere. And that's the weight. So even the idea of going somewhere specific or getting somewhere specific, different than where you are, is going to weigh you down at least a little bit as you're going. Very much so. And it's like, how much weight are you willing to bear? And it's like your willingness to do so, because it isn't necessary, despite it, being there at like all the time. If you're willing to look, but you don't have to. It comes down to you.
I would like to introduce a possibility that in the same way that thoughts happen on their own in this, and we have the ability to deliberately create them, emotions also happen on their own, and we have the ability to create them. And what I mean is that you may feel a certain way at any given point and not have a reason for feeling that way. Like, you didn't think your way there. You just woke up feeling kind of off, right? You didn't think your way there deliberately, right? You just felt that way. Don't give that a narrative. Just let that be what it is. But sometimes we think our way to a feeling. We think our way there. We're like, what will happen later on today? And then we get so caught up in worrying about all of the things that might happen later on today that we actually create our own sense of anxiety, because now we're focused on it. And so I would say that the trick, if there is one, is at first to recognize when you're doing that. It's the same with thinking. It's to recognize when you are deliberately going into the fiction of you, and understanding that doing so creates emotions as well as thoughts. And as you stop doing that, recognizing where it's habitually still happening, letting that kind of prune itself away until eventually you're just left with the feeling you're having and no temptation to narrate. And you're not deliberately trying to create any story whatsoever. So now it's just the feeling of being what you are all the time, right? Because that's really what it is. Like, we are always feeling what we are, but we are so caught up in the layers of fictional narrative that it's like it's going through numerous different types of distortion before we're addressing it. It's like we're feeling this way, but now I think about this, and this is my opinion of that feeling. And then it's just we have all of this. And so we're dealing with this huge structure of thought instead of just feeling what we were feeling to begin with. We were talking about anxiety yesterday, and it's a really good example, right? Like typically we will feel something, and you know that feeling. All of a sudden, it's like your heart rate picks up, your body's suddenly paying attention, like you feel it fully, and you're like, oh, I must be anxious. Well, why? Well, because it's uncomfortable. Why? If you keep going with that, it's like because I have an opinion of it. Then what you're left with is just a feeling. That's the point, is that if we stop labeling them, they become different things. They become more of a drive to pay attention, more of a reason to pay attention. But instead, we're just like, that's uncomfortable. Stop doing that. Like the only reason it's uncomfortable is because it's new or you haven't looked at it before. That's pretty much it. That's everything. That's your entire life. Everything unfamiliar is uncomfortable. The process of familiarity is the process of getting more comfortable. That's the whole point. But that's the danger, because in getting more comfortable, you start to make assumptions that it's always going to be that way. And that's the whole reason you have to keep questioning. So stop running from the uncertainty. This is something we say all the time, but that's true about what you're feeling. That said, know the difference between a self-created thought and emotion and something that's actually just a part of what you're doing.
Yeah, because there is certainly that difference, and I feel like I've realized more recently how much of that choice it is, like, to focus on some conceptual idea or continue to focus on those versus just a willingness to not focus on that. And as those discomforts arise, as things start to change, there is such a quick desire to want to label it, because it's been very interesting the last I don't know, week or two, almost feeling like I'm shaking off the cobwebs a little bit, like this part of me that I can remember. It's like a old memory almost is starting to, like, I don't know, be felt more. And it's been simultaneously freeing and uncomfortable, though, because to Ray's point, it's changed. And as it kind of fluctuates between really free and like really uncomfortable, because as I feel uncomfortable, there's not so much a familiar narrative to say or something to hold on to, or I'm not trying to give it so much of a reason immediately. And so it plays out differently in that, oh fuck, hold on. So I'm not giving it so much of a narrative as the feelings come up anymore. So when I do, though, there's more almost sensitivity to it. But it's been, oh man, how do I even? Yeah, it's been interesting just feeling that freedom in that, but then the back and forth with the discomfort and not needing to label it immediately, but there being familiar stories for that discomfort. And it's like how I was kind of seeing what you were saying was, with the discomfort, is like that discomfort's the root, and then it's like the emotion, feeling whatever is on top of that, based on where I fall on the judgment of the discomfort. Like, am I pinning this as something that's wrong that's happening? Because then there's this whole pile of like bad emotions that I don't like, and a bunch of stories on top of that that kind of, to your point, get filtered through and go through until I'm only hearing this story. But there's this like root assumption. And whereas if change I start to see as freedom, and like uncertainty being freedom, because it is the same thing. And not that I have to see it in any given way, it's just that I don't label it as it is, because it's the labeling that's the ultimate filter to everything. Like, as soon as you start saying you're sure of certain things as you're looking around, it's like that's when there starts to be some of the filters getting put back into place. And so as certain feelings come up, even even saying it's discomfort is making an assumption immediately, like what does discomfort feel like? And if, as I'm thinking about it,
What
it's
was it
like,
before it was discomfort? What did you react to? Where did the discomfort come from? Because that's an opinion, right?
yeah,
That's a
yeah.
response. Well, what are you responding to? What was that feeling before it became discomfort, before you started to run? What was the original feeling? And you can't get into it if you react to it. And so we're talking about the problem as if the discomfort's the problem. And it's like, no, we're running from the experience. The discomfort is just the first step. We're like, I don't like that. And that's it. What was it before that? It was just being. And it's what you're doing the rest of the time when you're not thinking about it. Isn't that funny? That's why all of a sudden we feel really light. We start to play and we're like, I'm sure there should be something wrong by now.
Yeah, and it's like the focus, like the question, "Oh, am I being present?" It's like, who exactly? And as soon as you're asking, it's like you start to wonder, and then potential for judgment comes in, and then how long, and then there's this whole fucking story opens up, and it's just, man, it's interesting to see how quickly there's certain desires to label certain things, even as anything, like knowing anything about what's going on, or like a moment to moment thing that's happening, and having any degree of certainty on top of that, like how Andrew's playing out, how I'm playing out. And oh man, because there's even a difference with feeling like you're something being played out and feeling like you're the playing out, because it's both and neither, right? Like there isn't one side or the other that you can settle upon. It's just what's happening regardless. And so you might as well step into it, you know? But there's nothing to step into either. So it's like you can't escape doing anything incorrectly. Like
You can just
you're
make it
always,
real hard on yourself.
yeah. Oh god, you can just like fucking be tripping yourself up as you go, like running with your hands glued to your feet or something, just making it real tough on yourself instead of not. Instead of not. But I've built a lot of reasons to do so, thinking that it was, unsafe to just let go. Got to be careful. Got to be sure that this is going to play out or be seen in this way, shape, or form. And then it's like all of those things that were built, then it is feeling like working backwards through the reasons to take things seriously, the reasons to take myself seriously. And there was a lot built there. And then working through, it's like, there's not anything being worked through either. It's just how seriously am I taking this, whatever this is right now, whatever, build up of a feeling or yourself there is. Because even the statement of feeling, it's like there's no division between what you are and the feeling. A feeling an emotion implies that it's something that's separate from you. It's like, what exactly is separate? Like there's not a you separate from the feeling or the emotion. So it's like to even say you're feeling anything, it's like, what's feeling what?
And I would like to remind everybody that we have a community topics episode on emotions, emotional intelligence. In fact, I believe it is. And that episode is trippy as fuck. I haven't listened to it since we recorded it, but I remember very specifically going in a very similar direction as we are right now, talking about the fact that, and again, a difference between the self-created emotional psychosis that goes with investing in your ego and the actual emotion that you're experiencing at any given time when you're not thinking about that shit, when you're just being, as it were. Is that just another sense? Like, is that another way of connection to everybody else? Is there a tangible emotion that we are in fact all experiencing to some degree, but running from it in different ways, in the same way that we're running from it by identifying with thoughts? Right? Isn't that interesting? Like, it really is. When you break it down, you stop thinking about yourself you really start to become aware of the possibility that you don't have any borders. Like there's no edge to you. There's no place where you stop being you. It's all you. All of these people are you. And I mean you, listener. Like I'm you. Andrew's you. There's no disconnect. Like the moment that you are right now, just feel it. Just stop. Just understand that this moment, not in time, not this second, this place that you are right now, in between the heartbeats, right? In between the thoughts, this moment that you are, that could not happen if you were not here to experience it, has no edge. There's no place that this moment stops. It just keeps going. To me, to Andrew, to every other person who's listening to this across the whole world, across the whole universe, it's all one moment. And it's all connected as one moment. And it's you. So it is entirely possible, if you are just willing to let go of your very small idea of you, that what remains is the moment, intelligently being everything. And you're just an extension of it, the center of it, the source of it. But nonetheless, perceiving yourself as just a small part, that doesn't mean you are. Enjoy the experience of perceiving yourself as a small part for sure, but at some point you have to understand that if you're not your idea, then the only thing that you are is whatever is left.
Oh my God, my audacity to think that I can do it better. And yet, oh man. Because that's all, like, it's just you playing out. And even the assumption that I'm something going through something, it's like, which component are you settling on? Like, which thing here are you settling on that's you? And it's almost like you start seeing the story as it's like a very, very, very familiar friend. Yeah, it's like your imaginary best friend you're saying yesterday. Like, oh man, because it's like always been there for you. And
Comforting
yet
you,
it's
comforting you,
yeah.
giving you some sense of what the fuck is going on. It's just never giving you a correct sense of what's going on.
No.
In the same way that, again, like when we're kids, when we're afraid, what would we do? We'd cover our heads with the blanket. Yeah, that's good. That's gonna fucking make all that shit go away, right? But that's exactly when we start picking that kind of thing up. Like if I just think I'm safe, I'm safe. And we invest in that illusion for a long time. It's just that it's the willingness to grow up. It's the willingness to accept the blanket's not doing shit. Reality's still there, right? Like making yourself feel better isn't actually helping you align with everything that's happening. It's not actually helping you feel better. It's just short term. That's all it is. Like you are still hurting yourself. You're just trying to maintain a lack of awareness of it. You're distracting yourself from the pain and then convincing yourself that life is just pain. And yay for religion. Life is suffering until you get to the promised land. Right. But that's really it. Like it's just we have this idea. And it's a comforting idea that unfortunately has served its purpose. We've grown out of so many other things. Why not this fixation on this idea of me? Why not that?
Why the fuck not? Right? Seeing it, even just talking about it as if it's an option is not familiar, is not common conversation at all. Like the willingness to look at identity being the root of all of it, because there's so much investment and desire, thinking there is a payoff, and yet even like death is, yeah, it's like you can have certain payoffs, but if you're fully invested in you being what you think, there's still an end. It's like that's what I guess Jesus was talking about with eternal life. It's like, what is the trade even to continuing to invest in that? The illusion of death as well with that. And so, yeah, it's I guess it's responsibility is a big component of it.
That's
Like,
the component.
yeah,
It really
like,
is. Like,
because as you pass it off to something else, even if it's feeling better, something else as opposed to you, that cuts down on your ability to have the option in each and every moment. The more you're putting it on something else, because it's always, you don't need a reason to be happy thing. Like, it comes from you always. And it's not to say happiness is the right answer, but it's that there are options on the table and perspectives that are always there.
I was just thinking, and this kind of ties to just something we've been talking about here and there, and it came up in the comment section. We pass responsibility really, really easily, and even to our fictional selves. Like, we'll pass responsibility off to our past self. Oh, I thought I already dealt with this. I thought I already let go of my story. Why didn't my past self do better? It's like, just let it go now, or I'm gonna let it go one day. One day I'm gonna get over this. It's like, stop doing that to your future self, you dick. Like, it's just like, just let it go now. We keep waiting for an excuse. Like, we keep thinking like, oh, at some point the story's not gonna get me. My ego's not going to get me. My thoughts aren't going to creep in. Stop playing victim. They're not doing that. You are entertaining them because you don't want to do the alternative. You don't want to do the alternative. Just fucking own it. Just own it. Stop running from it. Stop thinking there's something wrong with you and start recognizing you've decided there's something wrong with you so you can keep thinking. The alternative is to be where you are and shut the fuck up. The alternative is to be where you are and shut the fuck up about it. That's really it. Stop thinking about yourself, but me. That whole thing is just you wanting to feel comfortable about the same shit you've always thought about, and yet you still want out of it. You want out of it, but you don't want to stop picking it up. You cannot do that. And if you really want out, you have to decide each and every fucking moment. Each and every moment. You never make the decision and then it's over. You have to decide each and every moment what your priority is. Is it the fiction of you? Is that your priority? And if not, then start feeling your hands. Look at that. You can feel the sting. That's fucking real. That's real. And as soon as you're like, oh, I don't know what I feel about that, shut up. Just feel it. How long can you last before you start getting in there with your opinion? How long can you last before you start giving this narration of your experience? Because that's the practice. And if you're not willing to do that, then you're just looking for a way to continue to go back to your shit and come back and talk about going back to your shit, because that becomes a familiar conversation too. Getting out of your shit can be just as addictive as being in it. The alternative is to just focus on where you are. You got a cup in your hand, focus on the cup. Okay? If you're like, oh, my apartment's really boring, then that's on you for not being able to find something worth being interested in. Go for a walk, buy a book, read something. Whatever it is, the point is to get out of the narration and focus on what you're doing. Focus on what you're doing. And if it's hard for you to do that, make it more challenging. Slacklining. Great practice. Go for a bike ride. Whatever it is, if you've got to pay attention to keep balanced, that's helping you get out of your head. Okay, but that's just one step. You see, that's a way to get into the practice. Then you have to translate it to the rest of your life. You cannot expect for you to get to this place where thought is not going to be available. Like, you may as well just ask for a lobotomy. It's always going to be there, and you're always going to have to make the decision here and fucking now. That's not my priority. Not for any reason. You see, immediately you'll hear the brain like, yeah, because no. Fuck you. Fuck all my thoughts. Fuck my brain. I don't need reasons to decide to be in reality. I don't need a reason to decide to be in reality. I need reasons to decide to get lost in fiction, though. Fuck reasons. You have choice. You have will. You have freedom right here and fucking now. Let go of the reasons. Let go of the justification for what you're doing, for how you feel, for where you think you're going. Decide here and now. You don't fucking know. Pay attention to where you are. That's the best thing that you can do. And that is not a concept to learn. This is not a place you're ever going to go like, yeah, now I get it. No, it happens moment by fucking moment when you are challenged by your own shit. When you are all of a sudden lost in your head, that's your moment. Do you get it? Do you get it? Right here and now, do you get it? And that's the only place it matters. It's here and now. It's not something you can memorize and hold on to in the past or the future. It's now. Are you getting tense and stressed out about fiction? Or are you paying attention to where you are? Are you paying attention to where you are? And it is that is simple. It really is feel the ground beneath your fucking feet. Okay, feel the air going into your lungs. Feel the hair on your arms. Feel what's fucking real. What's real. And as soon as a thought comes in, that's the habit. Okay, focus on what you're feeling. Focus on what you are tangibly feeling here and now and not the narration. And that's going to be hard as fuck. And if you can pull off a couple of, like, I don't know, 10 microseconds, awesome. Next time, go for 20. Next time, go for 30. The point is, it's just like any other skill. It's something that you must practice. And the only reason you're going to is if it's a priority. It's the only reason. Okay. So, what is the priority? Is it to continue thinking about yourself? Because if so, you'll find a lot of reasons, as many as you need to justify it. Your brain's great that way. We really do forget that. You know, we forget if you decide you have a problem, your brain's like, okay, here's a bunch of reasons to justify that. It's really good that way. You know, and it sucks because that's the responsibility. That's what you're talking about. We don't want that. We're like, what? No, I've got problems that are the reasons that I feel like that. No, you're holding on to that. Like, sure, that's true for you right now, and you could equally decide that's not the case. You could equally decide I've got a bunch of fucking habits that keep popping up, but they're no problem. Every time I see them pop up, I just address that shit. Yeah, I might get caught up from time to time, but meh. You know, and it's a difference in how you decide you're doing against the onslaught of what you are. You know, like I don't look at myself as a challenge anymore. It's not like I have any less doubts or fears or insecurities than I used to. I really need everybody to understand that. It's not that I have any less doubts and fears and insecurities. It's not like I'm not aware of the impression that this fucking hat has on people, right? It's just that I'm not willing to suffer for it. My priority is my life. So why would I continue to be the victim of something that I continue to focus on? I'm the one creating it. Why would I do that? Right? Why? Because I thought it was helpful. Because I thought that was what life was all about. I thought that the best I could ever hope for was a good feeling about myself instead of freedom from the need for one.
Who has more, the man who has everything or the man who wants nothing? It's an easy answer, but fuck, dude, that was well said. And the practice is so real, and that's, I think, a beautiful part of this, at least for me. And even saying that, like, oh, oh, it's a practice. It's something I can practice. It's like, you're not practicing it. There's nothing to measure. There's nothing to, check your progress in or fucking check in on your shit. It's just, are you willing to? But it is fun because the reward is in and of itself. Like, when you're paying attention, you're actually seeing what's happening. And you almost have to be willing to jump into that. Like, and not jump into it, but just be willing to let go of something that you've been holding on to, kind of like the side of the pool. To know if you can swim, you got to let go of the side. If you're holding on to the side and there's like a unwillingness to let go, but you can let go and then try it out, check it out, see how it's going, test the waters, and then come back. It's like you can always tell yourself more bullshit. So if you're afraid of letting go of or not telling yourself so much shit, you can test it out and like always go back to tell yourself a story, and then just seeing how long, you know, you can keep just paying attention. Because part of me feels weird saying like the lengths and the time and all of that, but at the same time, I don't know, I guess for communication purposes, it's it's important, but yeah, just the willingness to continue to pay attention to where you're at, like the fulfillment is is unreal. Because and then you start to see the patterns from there. It's like when you're in them, you can't see. It's like looking at the trees, being in the forest, not being able to determine the forest from the trees. And then when you take a second to actually pay attention, you start to see. It's like stepping out of the forest for a second. You get a broader view of reality and yourself from a bunch of different perspectives when you're willing to. So there's almost an understandable, because there's like a flood of considerations that comes in. If you don't have faith in yourself, there's like, I can understand running from that, which is just running from seeing what's happening. And it's like the fucking child putting the blanket over their head. That's all that it is, because you're starting to see more. And it's like you can cover that blanket over your head, but there's going to be consequences, and it doesn't actually help you at all, whatsoever. It just gives you the illusion of safety. Like if I can't see them, they can't see me. Oh my gosh.
We have a follow-up here, and this is why I started the episode talking about the difference between emotions and thoughts that you create deliberately versus emotions that you actually are feeling, regardless of your narrative. Isn't the practice also an avoidance to not feel every emotion? No, it's kind of like this. If you had a table in front of you, and on that table were different books, and each of those books was a different story of your life. Same events, different perspectives of everything that happens in those events. So each and every one of these books is a slightly different perspective of what your existence is. And every time you go and you open a book and you're reading about yourself in this story, you feel different emotions. So is putting down the book avoiding those emotions if they only exist when you are focused on that particular story? Because you could focus on any other story. Are you avoiding all the other ones by not reading those books at the same time? See, what I'm saying is that the feeling that you feel like you're avoiding, you only feel like you're avoiding because you're addicted to it. So you're feeling a hole whenever you stop holding on to this narrative. Whenever you stop picking up the book, you're like, I don't know what to do with myself. And you reach for the book and then you justify it as I feel like I'm avoiding what's in the book. Yeah, because that's the reason that you're suffering. The book isn't the truth. It's just one of many. It's just one of many. None of them are the truth. That's the fun part. Because remember, each and every book has the same events. The only thing that's changed is the inner narration of those events, is the perspective of the person experiencing those events. And that exists all the time. You have infinite perspectives of what you're going through right now. Infinite perspectives. None of them are the whole truth. But you are attached to some of them. You've been reading a certain one of those books over and over and over again. You've gotten really attached to the emotional content. You've really gotten attached to like sympathizing, even pitying the main character. And so when you're no longer feeling the emotions that come with reading that book, you feel a hole. It's like mourning. It's like someone died, right? Except this particular person you can bring back to life every time you reach for that book. You don't actually have to let them go. And so nothing's going to make you do it. And it's not an avoidance to recognize that you are not that book, to recognize that that book is just a perspective of your life. It's just one that you've been reading over and over and over again. Explore some other books, right? Explore some other books, and you'll start to recognize that those aren't true either. The books where you're an all-powerful person who's, got influence over everything in your life. That's not necessarily true either. It feels really good sometimes until the crash, right? And those are also perspectives of what you're doing. The point is just to recognize that there are emotions that you will create for yourself through the fiction of you. And then there are the emotions that remain when you're not doing that. And they're not the same thing. They're not the same thing. The ones that we create for ourselves, though, we've been doing for a long time. That story that we've created for ourselves, we've been doing that for a long time. And we don't know what remains without it. That's what I was saying to Andrew early on, is that there comes a point where you start to recognize that the reason you're holding on to your suffering is because you're afraid of who you would be without it. You don't know. It's so unknown what your life would be if you weren't thinking about the stupid shit you're thinking about right now. And so you cling to it, whether you recognize it or not, because the familiar is always addictive.
Oh man, it really is that fight against change and uncertainty, and just holding on to a familiar story, continuing to tell yourself a familiar story just to keep that at bay, like continuing to shoot yourself in the foot over and over and over and over just because you've gotten used to shooting yourself in the foot, and at least you know that experience. Like it's a seemingly known, understood, certain experience to continue to suffer via my story about myself. And for a lot of those emotions, like it requires a story. Like picking up one of those books and reading it is necessary to even to like cause an emotion that you're feeling before the story to turn into the emotion that you think it is. Like the story is the necessary filter in order to have certainty about the feeling. And so when you're feeling something and you're not sure of it, like you pick up a book, you start telling yourself a story. Oh, that's close enough to this. That must be this. And then these reasons, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like, oh God, it's like my favorite book. My favorite book is the book of my individual, very specific perspective of myself. And the constant narration of it is so fucking wild that it's not a necessary component of this experience. Like I always kind of thought that it was. It's like, no, it's actually not. But then it's like, whoa, hold up. What do I? And it's like, yeah, you're doing it anyway. You're doing it anyway. So you might as well stop fogging the fucking windshield along the way as you go. It's like you're putting the windshield wipers on, fogging it at the same time, or dumping water on, or whatever. Like to yourself, you're doing both. And if you just stop pouring the water on, you won't need the windshield wipers and all the effort to work on yourself and focus on yourself and even let go of yourself. It's like you're creating yourself as you're saying you're letting go of yourself. Who exactly? What exactly? Because you're already it. You're already being it. You're already doing it. There's not this transformation that happens necessarily. It's like it could be perceived as a transformation, but you're not turning into anything or becoming something. It's not like you're fucking morphing, like a Pokemon going from whatever the tier 1 to tier 2 or 3, like which one? Charmander turning into Charizard. You're not doing like you're just you. Like you're already it playing out. And you just have a narrative that doubts that or has some idea, just to have some idea of what's going on, as opposed to just allowing yourself to continue to play out and having a little more fun with it. Like the reward is in and of itself as you stop telling yourself so many stories, but there has to be the willingness to let go of the false certainty and feeling of control, as if that's a possibility, because then you're just left with you here now, not without any control, but with sensitivity and sway that allows you to actually do something, because control doesn't exist. As much as you want to buy into it, as much as I want to buy into it, it doesn't exist. And so the continued process of trying to maintain something is a buying into control. Like if I continue to think about something, I can control at least my experience. And like there's no fun in that, even in continuing to have the same experience, waking up day after day after day, thinking that I'm a victim to something other than me, that I'm not just choosing to focus on it and don't have to, because it's always going to be there. And it's like whatever comes up, like I can still live my life. Like I can still do all the things that I was doing before the thing came up. There isn't so much of a difference. And yet it's almost like all that shit that I could look at is continuing to inform me as I go, because it's the processing. But as long as I'm not focused on it, I can actually utilize it as sort of that grab bag sort of thing, as opposed to just fucking staring at it. It's like it's still there in process. Like you don't have to look at it. And then it allows for it to then be, I don't know, more utilized, because you're just opening up the spout in a sense, as opposed to staring back down the barrel of it. Hmm.
I want to sidetrack for a quick second. It's not really sidetracking. I guess this kind of goes in the same direction. We don't really think of it this way, but we get the rare opportunity, because we are so powerful in our own minds, to play a number of characters for ourselves. And what I mean is that, like, whether we realize it or not, we're always kind of our own teacher. Like there's this part of us that's like, I need to learn things, and then there's this other part of us that's like, I'm going to fucking learn things, right? And it's just that we take a different stance all the time, and so we are teaching ourselves how to get through life. And in order to be a good teacher, we have to recognize that we don't know everything. We really do. We have to recognize that and question things all the time. But that means everything that even feels like the right thing to do, because you don't know. Often the things that make you feel the best are not really the right thing to do. They just make you feel the best. They have a short-term reward. And one of those things, and I know this, I know this because I went through a lot of different types of therapy where this was very much encouraged, and it often is. There is a very big difference between crying and catharsis. And I want to bring this across because often people tend to make the mistake that if they're crying, of thinking that if they're crying all the time, they're dealing with their shit. And the problem is that while it is important to have a good cry about all of the shit that you've gone through, understand that is only for the point of showing yourself empathy, not pity. So you can have a good cry in a moment of recognition about all the shit that you've had to go through in your life. But to take that after the fact and then continue to indulge in feeling sorry for yourself for going through all that shit is not healing. That is not healing. That is self-indulgent. And it's not that that kind of crying doesn't feel good to some degree, but it can leave you paralyzed thinking that you're not healing unless you're crying. And that is not the case. The crying is only a temporary moment where you have a recognition and some empathy for your story. After that, it's time to suck it up. After that, it is time to pull your shit together and recognize that crying ain't going to get you fucking anywhere. It's not going to do a thing. You're still here. You still have to deal with the next moment. And you're strong enough. That's the nice thing. It really is important to recognize that to some degree, you have to be a bit hard on yourself. Not in a scolding, shameful way, but to recognize, like, no, fuck, I'm stronger than this. I'm stronger than this. I know I know I'm stronger than this. Like, you need to decide that part is in there because you're deciding the weak part is. Right? You're just deciding which part of you want to focus on. And I'm telling you that you need to coach yourself. You need to teach yourself to be the kind of person that you want yourself to be. If you want to be free, then you need to teach yourself to be free. And you can, as long as you're not thinking about yourself and getting lost in doubt and all that shit. It really is. It's just about that. Don't be afraid to tell yourself that you are stronger than this. You may not like it, but why don't you like it? Outside of the fact that it felt really good to feel bad for myself. It felt really good to cry and feel like the world is against me because this justifies my perspective that I'm weak. right? Beware the feeling of feeling better for justifying that you're a victim. Beware that shit. That will get in your way. Understand you can tell yourself that you're strong and you are right.
Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right, right? It's always comes down to you. And I find myself, because I've been through it on Patreon calls, crying and things like that. I find myself more recently, like, still the tears come out, but it turns into laughter a lot more quickly because there almost needs to be this continued focus on some degree of a story, some degree of me. And it's like the tears come up, the emotions come up. And sometimes it's not even, it's just like a buildup of emotions. Like I'm not necessarily thinking about something, but then some perspective will come in where it's like a relative perspective to like, oh, I remember, you know, not feeling this free in the past. And there's like a sort of gap there. And then it'll very quickly, because as soon as, yeah, it's a story, like, is necessary. And I know just from conversations that I've had with people how not well received seeing experiences as options are, seeing an emotion or a continued investment into something is an option. And it's the most empowering thing you can ever hear. And it's incredibly disempowering to think that you're victim to everything that's always happening. But it's either you're a victim. It's like, I don't know, there's almost like a spectrum, like victim to choice in a sense. Like, do I have any sway over this whatsoever? And that's on the extreme end of I am subjected to this, my lot in life, blah, 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 over and over and over and over. And it's just like a very, very solid story on that end. And then on the other end is, hold on one second. What was the spectrum again? What was the first one?
Victim to responsible.
Victim to responsibility, and recognizing that even if you think that you're a victim to something, to recognize, oh, I have some sway or say over this, like even just a tiny bit. If I stop telling myself that, then how would things change? If I stopped reinforcing and running back to that familiar, thought, story, whatever, if I shifted one behavior that I typically habitually go back to because I'm now aware of it, that starts this sort of unraveling or snowball sort of effect, because you realize that it's an option, and it's almost like until you realize that it's an option, or has the potential to be that choice, maybe not realize necessarily right away that it's in the extreme end, that it's all just a choice. You need to continue to buy into certain perspective, certainties, illusions to continue to feel certain things and maintain them in a sense. But even just the willingness to question just a tiny bit, just a little bit, just be a little bit, tiny bit, tiny bit uncertain about something that you've continued to tell yourself. It's like that then shifts you. You're not quite so rigid. It's like physically, but mentally letting go of that certainty kind of like relaxes you physically a little bit. Like, I'm not quite so sure of that. And I don't really know what's to come. And I don't really know what it means about me. And I don't really know where anything is going, or what's happening right now, or that I cannot necessarily confirm that anyone's even thinking about me right now whatsoever. And the reality is that they're not. They're thinking about their assumptions about you. They're seeing a projection of themselves in you that they're utilizing through you to, you know, have some additional perspective of themselves and expand out that idea. And so they're never actually even looking at you. So in your assumptions of how things are going or how things are playing out, they're so deeply uncertain that it's mind-blowing, the depth of that. And I'm trying to settle upon this very, very shallow certainty that, like, oh, this means this and this is happening for this reason in the immediacy. But if you recognize that you don't know even close to that whatsoever, that continued investment starts to make so much less sense. when you realize that those, surface level assumptions that you've continued to make, that story is so deeply uncertain from so many infinite perspectives, and you're only seeing a smidge of it, and yet the entire thing. But if it's your assumption of it, then it's not it, and you're just seeing that. And so the depth of that uncertainty, that then I'll just come up with a little bit of my story and project that onto everything. And it's like a tiny little thin veil that just blankets over everything. And it's just my desire to be sure of that. Like, be certain about something that's going on right now. Like, oh no, there's none of that certainty whatsoever to any degree of any timeline and any story. And even the habitual stuff you go back to in your own past, or traumatic things, like, it's still your individual perspective. And there was no necessarily any certainty of that and how that played out. It's like, oh fuck, like nothing that's ever played out, any memory, any perspective of mine has ever been certain. Any degree of certainty that I have right now is not certain at all whatsoever. Like, name anything, and it's not. And it's just a tiny little smidge of a perspective that I'm then making just a massive fucking assumption about the whole goddamn thing, moment to moment to moment. But the assumptions only exist here now also, and those aren't necessary.
But they sneak up real fast, and I know. So here's the thing: is that immediately we'll be like, okay, I know my thoughts aren't real. I'm telling myself my thoughts aren't real. All of that. Stop that. Like, outside of the right, those aren't the truth. Right? It's not that they have no reality. Like, to say your thoughts aren't real is kind of a misunderstanding. What I mean is that your thoughts are as real as you decide they are. Keep that in mind. So the more effort you're putting into deciding that they're not real, the more effort you've actually put into deciding that they are. Like, if you're really struggling with this, it's because you kind of want to. It's just the fact that you're just like, right, my thoughts aren't real. What is? What is? And this is where, again, like, pick up a rock, jump on the spot. It doesn't matter what you do. The point is that you're doing rather than thinking about what you're doing. And that is where your space is. But immediately when we start recognizing, like, right, oh, okay, so that's all optional. Then you're like, but what kind of person would I be to hold on to all that? Stop that. Like, you're just doing it again. Now you're trying to come up with a reason for why you keep reaching for thought. Because you fucking can. Because you can. You have the fucking limitless ability to pull any perspective of yourself out of the ether. Any perspective. And you will always have that ability. You will always have the ability to tell yourself that you are a piece of shit. You will always have the ability to tell yourself that you're wrong. You will always have the ability to tell yourself that there's a such thing as right. You're always going to have the ability to get in your own fucking way. It's not going away. Stop asking for it to go away. It is quite literally why you're so goddamn powerful and have so much potential. Right? It is what you want. You want that freedom, the ability to just laugh shit off, the ability to just forge ahead without questioning yourself. That's all in that spectrum as well. It's just that you keep reaching for this shitty version because you convince yourself that it's necessary. And then you listen to that, but you don't have to. You don't have to listen to that. Okay, stop judging yourself. Stop thinking that there's a path through your thought to a place where you're not thinking anymore. Okay? That place is here now. It's right now, and you cannot think your way there. What you can do, if you really, really need to, right, is clap your hands real fucking hard so you can feel them tingle. That is all you need to do. Because now you're paying attention. You're paying attention to something rather than thinking about it. And there's a difference. That's all. And this doesn't mean that when your thoughts pop up, you're like, oh, fuck, I'm not doing it. No, that's the urge to pay attention to them again. The thoughts don't go away. Your attention doesn't have to be on them. Okay, they will inform you. You know, like little fragments of a newspaper flying through the wind. All of a sudden, a headline will go by. It's like, you're late for work. Oh fuck, you know, and that's okay. You know, but you don't have to go, you're late for work, therefore I'm a piece of shit, and start writing a whole article on your way to work. Like, you don't need to do that. You can let these thoughts just kind of float around doing their thing because they're part of your intelligence processing. But as soon as you get in there, you are making yourself dumber. You really are. You're cutting your clarity in half. You're cutting your ability in half easily, each and every time you invest in one of these goddamn fictions as truth. Because you, at your best, is when you are here in the present moment, not thinking about it. And every thought that takes you away from that experience is cutting your efficacy in half every time.
Oh man, well said. I like the thoughts passing by and then making some fucking story about it. And even like, oh, I go through that all the time, and it almost feels like a fucking like whirlwind of thoughts and potential thoughts when you realize that they're gonna be there. Like, it's there, it's an option. It no longer becomes this thing like, this is something that needs to be worked on. This is something that needs to be let go of. This is something that needs to be dropped. It's like, no, it's going to be there. And as that, like, even just as you were talking there, it's almost like it, I recognized it not as something that was incorrect. It was just a component of the experience. Like, yeah, there's like this sort of buzz of potential things I could look at. But then seeing them as bouncing around all over the place, it's like, yeah, they're going to be just random shit. And I'm going to make a familiar story about it, but I don't have to look at it. Like, just because I feel it or see it bouncing around doesn't mean that it has to be the focus. And then it just becomes sort of like a gray cloud in a sense, like a swarm of bees or something, that there's nothing distinct coming out of it. It's just this sort of thing that I don't have to pay so much attention to until it's almost like as you continue to exist, it gets smaller and smaller until it's just like, oh, that's just something else I was thinking was there, to think that there was something else there, like something else to focus on. Or even if I don't even know, is it like a travel bag with the perception of division comes with the potential to make an opinion about something else, my idea of me versus something else. And it's like always there in potential, but it doesn't mean that it has to be focused on. And so it is always an option. And even in saying that, like, it's kind of freeing in a sense, because it's like the fight, the whole like classic what you resist persists or a thing, to think that it's something that shouldn't be there or shouldn't be happening. Like, to any degree of your experience, any fight towards it or the thought of it being different keeps you there. And it's just your opinion that's keeping you from change, from what's going on. And yet you're still changing. You're just making that fucking experience way more tough on yourself. And at the same time, you're kind of like almost not changing. Like, you are, but if you're maintaining some continued narrative, it's like there's the excuse to continue to fight the change, and like changing in the sense that you keep shifting and going back to familiar patterns. And you just keep doing that as opposed to just letting go and allowing for it to continue on. And it's just that fight towards what's what's going on right now, what's happening right now. That fight, resistance to it is creating the whole thing. Like, the whole story is, you have to have a story in order to fight something, in order to resist something, an idea of what's happening, some certainty. But without that, it's hard to have much of an opinion without false certainty.
This is why it's so hard to get, right? This is really why it's so hard to understand that chasing happiness, running away from your suffering, makes it bigger. You're fighting yourself. So the more you think you need to fight, the stronger you're making the other side, right? The stronger you're making the perception that you are fighting, and the stronger you're making the side that you're fighting against, right? Because you're making yourself seem real little. And so if you convince yourself like, oh God, I've got this long, arduous journey through my trauma to come back to the present. You are absolutely correct. And because everything that you've just told yourself made all of your thoughts huge and you very, very little and weak. And that is exactly what we're doing all the time, is thinking that the problem is huge and thus making it bigger. And we don't understand that the easiest way to face the monster is to stop seeing it as a monster. Because in doing so, we accept how strong we are. That's tricky. It's tricky because we think to ourselves, but if I'm not fighting against it, I'll never escape. And that is part of the trap. That's it. If I'm not chasing happiness, I'll never get there. And you're getting farther and farther and farther away. It really is a paradox. Everything is half-assed backwards. The stronger you are fighting for happiness, the stronger you're fighting against happiness. It really is that. And we don't want to admit that because it's like, well, then what do I do? Not that. Don't ask. Stop asking. That go do something. Go do something, and that will lead to another thing, and that will lead to another thing, and that will lead to another thing. And through all of that, you're not going to know where it's going. You're going to want to find out. You're going to want to tell yourself, I need to know where this is going. What does it mean about me? All of that shit. But you know what that does. It locks you up in a fiction that actually makes it more and more difficult for you to just change as life changes. So again, what are your priorities? Are you so attached to those books? Or are you willing to just stop reading fiction and be where you are? Walk away from the table. Leave the books alone.
Yeah, and you can just continue to find out what you're capable of without so much of that story, because it's total, like it's a whole different newfound experience. It's, oh my gosh, it's not even comparable, and that's why I guess it is tough to, oh God, and even any fucking story about what's going on, like, oh God, it's so fucking basic right here that even the thought or the expression of there being some sort of journey is so fucked. Like, the journey is the idea of there being a journey at all. Like, that's it. That you're getting somewhere, going somewhere, and fighting something, like, because as soon as you think you should be different than you are, it's, time's coming into play. As soon as there's judgment or criticism or, ideas of what are happening, it's like that either should continue to happen or shouldn't be happening. And that process will play out over time. And so without so much of that opinion of any degree of what's happening, what you're doing, what anything's doing, you're just where you're at. Like, you're just left with yourself here now. And like, there's, oh God, there's no process at all to yourself. And there's not a need to continue to, so there's no need to continue to check in with that process at all, because it doesn't exist. It's like, in order to check in, you got to think that you're going through something, going somewhere, as opposed to just being what you are right now. So even in any degree of any experience, like whatever it is, even as you're caught up in shit, it's like whatever you're telling yourself on top of that, it's like, just keep going, just keep going, just keep going, just keep going. Like, you don't know where, so you can either pay attention to it happening as you're going, or you can come up with some familiar fictitious story about where it might go and continue to miss it yourself here now. Like, to think
Until
that
it
you're,
grinds you to dust. And that's exactly what it feels like. But this is the answer we don't want to hear when we're suffering. Yeah, that's going to happen. It's exactly what we don't want to hear. It's part of it. Yep, for sure. Keep going. It's like, but when will it end? When you stop focusing on it. It's, and that's it. Is we want some promise. We want some reassurance. Like, when will this come to an end? When you stop bringing it up all the fucking time, habitually, because you're afraid of it. That's what it is. You make it huge. You don't have to. Keep going, and eventually, if you pay attention, you'll learn that you're getting in your own way. That is the only answer that we have. That's the only answer that we're ever really getting across, is that you don't know what you're capable of. But the fact that you keep telling yourself a bunch of shit is what's getting in your way. Just keep going. Right. And this is it. When you're feeling like really depressed, when you're feeling like, oh my God, I could become suicidal. Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. That doesn't mean you're going to do anything. Like, understand, feeling a certain way doesn't mean you failed, doesn't mean life's going wrong, doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. And I understand a lot of people right around this point, they just stop listening. It's like, why aren't you making me feel better? Why aren't you telling me also that there's something wrong with me that I can fix? Like, it's because there isn't. You just want to keep thinking about yourself. You just want to keep thinking about yourself, and that's okay, but you can't blame anyone else. You can't sit there playing victim while you continue to think about reasons that you are a victim. You understand? And that's what it is. It's that responsibility. And I get it. I understand when you're in the pit, it's not something you want to really take on, but guess what? Sitting there crying about it ain't going to do shit for you. It's not going to do shit for you. Do you really want to give up your whole life? Do you really want to give up each and every moment just so you can sit there feeling sorry for yourself because shit sucks? The alternative is for you to stop thinking shit sucks, to just deal with what it is, stop having an opinion, and do something with it. And just do something. Stop thinking about yourself. Just do something. And what you'll find through doing something is fucking mastery. And in mastery, you're mastering yourself. You're understanding that you are the thing that's in the way of mastering anything. But you have to keep going through the shit. You have to go through. And you have to stop telling yourself that you can't, that you shouldn't, that it shouldn't be this way, that you're going to be miserable and all that shit for the rest of your life, because you're just making it worse. You're just making it worse. You're strong enough. Stop thinking about it. It's like, what do I do when my thoughts pop up? Don't ask that. That's it. Just go, oh, look, they're thoughts. They're thoughts. It'd be like you're chasing a fart in the wind. Like, you understand? You're just like, that smells terrible. Better run after it, and that's exactly what you're doing. You're like, why does this keep smelling terrible? It's because you keep chasing it. Let it blow away, right? Like, just keep going. But because you had a response to it, you think you need to keep focusing on it. Let it go. It's just one of many responses that you could have had at any given point. Don't take yourself so seriously. Understand, you can be a fucking tool from time to time, and it doesn't mean anything about you. You can do really well other times. You could be a total ass other times. It doesn't fucking mean anything about you. You're figuring this shit out. That's part of living. Stop having this ideal picture of who you could be in your mind, because that person doesn't exist. The one that does exist is the one that's here right now. And that person is not the person you think you are. You are not bound by this idea that you're separate. You are the whole universe. You are all of reality in action. And that's not something I want you to believe. It's something that you can experience if you just stop telling yourself you're not. Stop telling yourself anything. And what you recognize is that you are everything. There's no need for you to be more. There's no need for you to think you're less. The only reason you can think you're less is because you're so fucking limitless that you have that whole spectrum of possibility you can dwell on. Isn't that funny? You're like, I feel like I'm less. Well, that's a holy fucking powerful thing for you to do. Holy shit. Like, you can actually convince yourself you're not what you are? Wow. Do you even take in that power? Like, you have an incredible amount of power. And it's just that at the moment, you're using it to play victim. And that's okay too. This has been a fun conversation.
Oh, this has been incredibly fun. And how often, as soon as we feel like there's a problem with something going on, there's got to be a fucking whole ass story coming up behind it. And it's like, if you're willing to realize that, oh, maybe that thing you think is wrong isn't. Like, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure that what you're feeling right now should be different than it is? What would you prefer? Something that didn't feel like this? Yeah, you don't know that though. And you need a whole story behind where it's going, or some false certainty of where it's come from and where it's going. And Oh man, it's wild how we just perpetuate it for ourselves and continue to do so. But yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate everyone for tuning in, and excited to chat with somebody on Patreon soon here.
About 15 minutes, a tier 1 call today. So if you'd like to join us on Patreon, please do. Patreon.com/dualistic unity. We're so confident that you'll love it there that we actually have a 7-day free trial. So just jump in, join us. You can chat with us 5 days a week. There is a QR code on the screen for the last ticket to our Vancouver mini retreat. If you haven't had a chance to hang with us in person, if you're dealing with this shit, and I mean this, like, as much as it's good to book one-on-one sessions and do all that, there's only so much that we can do through Zoom. But if you want to come hang with us for a couple fucking days, I'll pound this shit right into your head like nothing else. For sure, because I live like this. This is how I live. If you want to hang out with me, you are going to fucking relax. You are going to get out of your own way, because I won't tolerate your fictional bullshit. I just won't. Doesn't mean I'm going to give you shit for it. I'm just going to disregard it like it's nothing, in the same way that you can. So if you're really having problems with this, buy a fucking ticket. And it's an investment in yourself. I understand it can be a little bit on the pricier side, but it's because there is so much opportunity for you to do something with your fucking time there. We really do make it everything that we can for you. So if you want to get over this shit, if you're really dwelling upon it and you just want to be in a place for 3 days where people look at you and understand that your shit is unimportant, in the same way that you can understand that your shit is unimportant, and feel free and play and hang out with people who are doing the same fucking thing, join us in Vancouver if you can. There's 1 bed left. We'd love to see you. Other than that, there's the Netherlands coming up. We're going to adjourn here for another 13 minutes. We'll see you on Patreon shortly. I am going to go smoke a joint. Everyone, thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.